Hey everyone, Andrig with Andrig's Aircooled technology. I wanted to do a video about kind of how the calculus for engine design changes based on improved cooling with my products. So I now have sold a lot of my products, starting with the Evolution 1 cooling fan, the original lightweight cooling fan, the introduction of the Evolution 2, second gen now, the velocity rings, the full cooling systems, my Evolution fan shroud, and then in combination with either OEM fans or with my fans, Evolution 1 or Evolution 2, and velocity rings for that as well. So you go anywhere, you go from just a little over 7% improvement in overall airflow with a velocity ring all the way to 135% increase in cooling airflow with an Evolution 2 complete cooling system and a velocity ring that matches that fan shroud. So, that's a wide range of stuff. If you match, the cooling system kind of towards both your driving style and your horsepower output correctly, your temps on your engines, your cylinder head temp, is going to come way down, right? And I get emails from customers all the time these days about, oh, wow, the temperatures have come down dramatically when I installed your product. An example of one customer in Florida is during the summer, in fact, they installed an Evolution 2 fan kit into a doghouse fan shroud. They had not only the doghouse cooler, but they also had external oil cooler with a fan, a thermostatically controlled fan. And his oil temperature, or his head temperatures dropped, I think, from 360 to like 280 degrees Fahrenheit, and his oil temps dropped to about 160 degrees, which is kind of on the edge of being too cold. 160 degree Fahrenheit oil temperature is like the minimum oil temperature you should ever have in terms of getting your engine up to operating temperature. SAE did a study where they did oil analysis with various oil temperatures to see what happened in terms of wear characteristics. And of course, you got to sample the oil to see how much things are in it, right? And from a wear perspective, like if you see a lot of iron, that means your rings are wearing really fast. You shouldn't really see much iron. So this is what causes the engines to wear out quickly. Is if you don't have adequate warm up to 160 degrees was what the study actually showed. At 160 degrees and above, the iron content in the oil samples disappeared. But below that, a lot of iron shows up in the oil samples. So that gives you a great little, don't ever go below 160, right? Your engine should warm up to that at a minimum. Of course, 180 is much better. Just gives you room, right? So, but that's an example of, you go from the stock cooling system to something that actually more matches your engine. Your cylinder heads temperatures are gonna drop, and your oil temperatures are gonna drop, and those two things are directly related to each other. If your oil temps are real high, yes, you can control them. What people have been doing, controlling them with just add extra oil cooling, right? But the real issue is actually your cylinder temperatures are too high. Cylinder head temperatures are too high. You get your cylinder head temperatures down, your oil temperatures will follow. So in his case, right, he really needs to lower the amount of oil cooling that he has because he's kind of at a kind of a pretty dangerous spot sitting at 160 degrees with his oil temperature. His engine's going to wear out really quickly. And I didn't mention that to him, so he was fully aware of that. And this was back in July of last year that we had this conversation. So another example, stock engine. And a lot of people's like, well, the stock cooling system should be fine for a stock engine, right? Well, that really depends on where you live. This particular customer, I believe, is in Arizona. And I think Phoenix area of Arizona. Phoenix is like, I believe, like 2,500 feet above sea level. So it's not real low. It's not super high. Not like where I live. I'm at over 5,500 feet above sea level. So you have thinner air, right? You have hot temperatures, and air density is lower. So in that kind of situation, he's driving around in 105-degree temperatures, and then he was driving around at night and it was still like 97. And just a stock Super Beetle 1600 doghouse fan shroud, just completely stock engine. And he did a before and after video of installing an Evolution 2 cooling fan kit into his car. And in the before, I was just afraid his engine is just going to like burn up, because his cylinder head temperatures were like 375, 380 degrees. His oil temps were way up there, like 250, 260. In that range, you're starting to get to a point where certain oil, even synthetic oils, will actually somewhat break down molecularly, in those temperatures. Depends on the oil. You can go probably as high as about 275 with most oils, but if you ever go above that, with most good quality oils, I should say, if you go above that, you got to go change your oil right away, because your oil is toast. It's not good. But he's driving on the highway, and his oil pressure light was coming on in the car, cruising at 65 miles an hour on the highway at night. So that was not good. His engine is not in good shape, right? And then he did an after video, and his temperatures came way down. I forget the exact temperatures on his, but his oil light never came on. His oil pressure came back up, because obviously the hotter that oil gets, the thinner it gets, the harder it is to maintain the pressure. And with a totally stock engine, you only got that 22 millimeter oil pump, right? So even the stock cooling system was really designed for a more temperate climate, not for something that has both altitude and super high temperatures, right? Because your air density is so low. So air density, obviously, when it heats up, the air expands, the density goes down, right? So there's just literally less air. And then you add altitude, well, barometric pressure goes down because you're higher up, and then air expands even more. There's literally less air for every, cubic foot space, right? There's less air molecules in that space. So there's, the cooling system is pulling on that, and that's the air density. That's the best you're going to get, right? So when you have those kind of combinations, you end up with cooling problems, even with stock engines, right? So the fact that we've kind of been as engine builders, and this is really who this is targeted for, is you build your own engine. Even if you just build your own, you're not professional. You don't build and sell engines to other people. This is important, right, to understand, right? Which is that stock cooling system was never designed, even for a stock engine, in extreme climates, right? Altitude and temperature, right, affects air density. Lowering air density, making the cooling system less effective. And that's true for a water-cooled car too, in terms of there's less air going through your radiator. There's less air going through, if you have an external oil cooler, less air going to go through that naturally. Even with a fan pulling on the air, there's just less air. So you end up with less effective cooling. So these products, the products for improving the cooling system, have really been needed for forever, and it's kind of a niche now that I've kind of filled quite well with the products. But let's go on to what does that mean design-wise, right? If you match the cooling requirements of the cooling system to your engine design, right? Now you can get away with, you may still need an external oil cooler, if you have my Evolution 1 or Evolution 2 cooling system, or even just my Evolution fan shroud with a stock fan, you've increased the cooling capacity anywhere from 52% to 135%. That's a big increase. So, but depending how you drive, how often you are, at that top end of horsepower, is important to understand, right? So in my modeling, I can change that percentage and give people guidance, right, on that. But if you're So you really need to understand, how the car is going to be driven, because obviously at part throttle conditions, cruising on a highway, a Beetle uses, somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think I remember from my model, if you're just cruising the highway, you're going to use 30 something horsepower to just keep that. That's based on the aerodynamic drag, the aerodynamic frontal area, so the coefficient of drag for a Beetle, and the frontal area, right? How much horsepower you actually need to travel at 65 miles per hour. Of course, that's a flat road, no wind, that kind of stuff, right? So, or at least no appreciable wind, because those things really affect Beetle, because the rounded shape makes them like airfoils, right? And the wind can really affect how much power you use. So you're just you're using a small amount of power. Yeah, you can get away with the stock cooling system many times, just cruising around, right? But as soon as you're like, I really want to hammer that thing, I'm giving it lots of revs, ready, or I'm driving really fast because I got enough power to do that, etc. You're definitely going to be overtaxing your system, and it shows up in the oil temperatures. But the oil temperatures are directly related to your cylinder head temps. So I had a potential customer. I don't think a guy ever actually bought from me, a turbo car here in Colorado, and he says the cylinder head temps would regularly hit 405 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, 405 degrees Fahrenheit is an overheat condition of a stock head. Now, of course, he doesn't have stock heads, and the new heads are much better. Much thicker materials, just better castings than the originals, better valve seats and valves, better valve guides, better less material removed where the spark plug is, because they all now use 12 millimeter spark plugs instead of 14 millimeter spark plugs like the originals. So that area, that was susceptible to cracks on a stock head, is much thicker now, right? So that 2 millimeters makes a huge difference in terms of how much material is there. So stock heads are much better. So he can get away with that, but that's just, you're living on the edge when you have cylinder head temps above 400 degrees, right? So you get too much more than that. You're looking at potentially drop seats, that kind of stuff, because obviously there you've got a seat that's interference fit into aluminum, and aluminum just keeps expanding the hotter it gets. So the hotter your head gets, more it expands. The more it expands, the looser that seat's going to get. So you get into temperatures well above 400 degrees. You're even though you're controlling your oil temperatures with these massive oil coolers, external, you're still like living on the edge of what your head should really should be subjected to. Plus, all that extra heat leads to things like detonation. It can lead to pre-ignition. And detonation is uncontrolled burning after the spark event. So you get incomplete burning, but then there's hot spots, etc. The head is so hot, all of a sudden you get like additional burning happening in an uncontrolled. Instead of the flame front just moving through the air fuel mixture nice and evenly, it's going to move through, and then all of a sudden there's going to be bang, bang, other ignitions that are being done just because things are so hot. So if your cylinder head temp's that hot, your crown of your cylinder, of your piston, is really hot too, right? So detonation comes. Pre-ignition is actually when you have ignition before the spark actually happens, and that'll just destroy your engine instantly. If you're like driving along, boom, and all of a sudden your engine just blows up, whether it's on the drag strip, whether you're off-road racer, whether you're on the highway or whatever, that's pre-ignition. That's not detonation. Pre-ignition is what blows holes through, tops of cylinders and that kind of stuff, because you have the compression event. So your piston's coming up, it's compressing, cylinder pressure is getting higher and higher, and the spark hasn't happened yet. You're not all the way, wherever your advance is. Let's say you're, maybe you're only 5 degrees before top dead center, or maybe you're more than that, depending on RPM level where you are. You might be up at as many as 36 degrees before top dead center, or even more. But regardless, before you get to the spark event, all of a sudden things are, igniting. Now you've got all this, the cylinder pressure goes through the roof. temperature is super high. It's like a flamethrower when that happens, and of course your piston's trying to go up still, right? You're not you're not in that area of quench and squish, right, where you're going to get a spark event and your cylinder's going to go back down, right? So it's traveling full speed, up the cylinder, and of course then you got this counter force that just and that's why it melts rings and the sides of pistons and blows hole through pistons. All those kinds of things happen with pre-ignition. So anyway, long story short, you've got a cooling system matched to the performance level of your engine and your driving style. Now your head temps are going to be reasonable. I had a turbo car in Puerto Rico, customer of a turbo car in Puerto Rico, and he was telling me his head temps were like staying below 300. His oil temp was staying at 200 and below, even under boost, right? So and he installed I believe an Evolution 2 complete cooling system on that engine, right? You get your head temps. I always say try to get your head temps below 300, no matter how you're driving the car. Now it can go above 300 if you're driving just all out for a very long. Maybe you're doing endurance racing, but keep your head temps reasonable, like 325 and lower, and that will help your engine really last. And then your oil temps will be, much easier to control, and you don't need to design out, some massive external oil cooler. Yeah, for really high performance engines, they will need extra oil cooling. There is no doubt about that, even with your head temps down. But having said that, I think the big thing, right, is instead of concentrate on your oil temp, concentrate on your head temp. Get your head temp under control. Your oil temp will follow, and then size your oil your oil temperature stuff considerably smaller than you would. I think for most engines, I'm going to show you something. This is a C-Trab 19-row oil cooler with a thermostatically controlled fan. This is a prototype mounting solution for it to go on the torsion tube, and even work with the IRS suspension, which obviously comes across at an angle. This oil cooler is probably all most engines, even very, very high performance like turbo engines, need if you have your head temps under control. If you size that cooling system appropriately, and you might still need some additional oil cooling, but something like this is probably all you'll need. Now, with my Evolution 1 and 2 cooling systems, there's no oil cooler on the engine anymore. So this would be what you would be basing it on. But these are really good oil coolers. They're almost like a shoebox shape. Don't take them nearly as much room. They have the thermostatically controlled fan. They have all the other accessories for full flow with oil thermostats, which I fully recommend an oil thermostat. Get your oil temp up fast. That'll help your engine last. So in general, this is probably the only thing most engines need. And that's, look at I don't have big hands, right? It's just basically the size of my hand. So, you can get away with much less oil cooling because your oil temperatures will be much lower, just by getting your cylinder head temps down. So calculus for, designing your engine and the cooling, right? Match the cooling system. I can help with that. You can also look at my cooling system guidance video, but if you need specifics, like this is how I'm driving the car, this is how much time I'll probably be at full throttle, part throttle, etc. And we can kind of model that to say this is kind of how much cooling capacity you need based on the horsepower level. Because if you're accessing, even if you just got maybe some mild engine, 100 horsepower or 110, 120. But it's a racer, and you're gonna be doing maybe dirt track, short track, off-road class 11 racing or something like that. You're gonna be nearly at full throttle all the time, right? So those engines are gonna get real hot. So they'll need more cooling, than they'll need something that's like in the 100% range of extra cooling capacity, right? So you end up with like somewhere in that an Evolution 1 cooling system would be required for that if you're just at full throttle, just right the whole time. And so, or near full throttle most of the time. So it depends on the engine, depends on driving, what you really need. But if you match that well, then you can reduce your oil cooling capacity and keep your oil temperatures, under control easier because your cylinder head temp's better. Your engine will last, a lot longer, in turn, especially if you're racing, than you would otherwise. That's for sure. You keep all those temps down. Cylinder head temp's the most important. So get a good cylinder head temp gauge as well. Even the low end, they don't have very good thermocouplers like a VDO gauge with their thermocoupler that goes under the spark plug. Still better than nothing. They're not as nearly as accurate as ones that take an actual sender that you can embed into the cylinder head. But having said that, they're consistent, right? And you will see, a drop that is consistent with what's really happening in your engine, even if the exact temperature isn't right. So, but get yourself a good quality cylinder head temperature gauge, and really monitor cylinder heads. You'll find that is the key to a well-running engine. Now, once you've done that and you have cylinder head temps under control, it opens up tuning opportunities, right? If your cylinder head temps are really high, well, you're not probably going to be able to run as much advance, which makes more power because it's more efficient. You won't be able to run your risk of detonation and all that go up. But you can now you can play with more advance. You don't necessarily also have to depend on a rich fat mixture. You can be more efficient in your air fuel mixture because you're not dependent on the gasoline absorbing heat from the cylinder head. A lot of people do that tuning wise, right? They just make your mixture really rich like all the time. You're running like 12.5 to 1, even at part throttle operation, whatever, to cool your heads. Because obviously gasoline, water does this. You can do water injection, turbos, that's really common. Methanol injection, methanol is really good at absorbing heat when it vaporizes. Water is as well. Gasoline does as well. It's not as good as like methanol, but in fact it's like half, I think, what methanol is. It might be less than that. I have to look it up again, but that absorbs heat. That now I can run, if I'm doing part throttle, whatever, I can run more towards the stoichiometric value of 14.7 to 1, or at 14.7, or even leaner at times if you're just looking for part throttle cruising, just getting better gas mileage. If maybe you're doing on the street and you're racing the car or whatever, depending what you need. So air fuel ratio can change. Your advance can change from a tuning perspective in ways that are not possible if you're only controlling oil temp through just a lot of oil capacity, oil cooler capacity. If you're doing it through proper cooling of the cylinder heads through the air-cooled system, right, the fan shroud and the fan combination, it opens up opportunities for you to make a more efficient engine, make more power, and have more reliability. So those are the things that really change. So if you need any guidance as an engine builder, I have a mathematical model that kind of matches my products based on their airflow relative to stock. And I have it also between like Beetle and Bus, because I happen to know the drag coefficients of those. Karmann Ghia would be similar to probably Bus, if you can believe it, but with a lower frontal area, right? So it's considerably better. Aerodynamically, they're better than the Beetle. The Bus actually has a lower drag coefficient, but it has a very large frontal area. So even though the coefficient of drag is lower, obviously drag is much, much higher because it's just such a much bigger vehicle. So coefficient of drag, does not stand by itself. You need to understand the frontal area of the vehicle. So I have all that in a mathematical model. I can plug in the way you know, different percentages for how you drive, like how much you're going to be at, you know, accessing that peak power, you know, at full throttle operation, that kind of stuff. You can just let me know, and we can match stuff up. And then once you've got it matched up, now get that thing on a dyno, get that thing tested in the car, doesn't really matter. And now you can play around with tuning options that weren't necessarily available to you before, because if you're, the only thing you could really do if you're running a stock type cooling system is, you know, reduce your timing, increase your fuel, making your air fuel ratio quite fat, and adding a bunch of oil cooling capacity to keep things under control with the oil. But your cylinder head temps are still going to be high. The oil temp being down will do very little, I mean almost none, changing your cylinder head temp. But your cylinder head temp dropping will change your oil temp dramatically. And I've seen this, you know, now over the course of the last, you know, how many years, about 5.5 years since Evolution 1 first came out. I've been seeing that correlation at time after time, so not just in my own testing, but with every customer engine combination you could think of, from stock to, you know, I had one guy with a, you know, 500 plus horsepower methanol engine, right? So yeah, there's no doubting, there's so many data points that is, you know, those correlate perfectly. And so getting your cylinder head temps down, that's the key to a nice, reliable engine that you can tune more effectively to be more efficient and actually make more power, and still keep, you know, thing reliable. And that's the big thing. We want to build reliable engines, right? We don't want to build engines that blow up, right? Drop seats, or, you know, whatever the case may be, right? So with that, check out my other video with the cooling level guidance, but also you can definitely just email me at Andrig at andrigsaircooledtechnology.com with your kind of engine combination, what kind of horsepower you're making. Of course, you could start making even more. You cool it right, you can make even more with the proper tuning. So that's really kind of it in terms of engine building and what to go think about differently with your engine builds if you match up a really good cooling system to your engine. So appreciate the time, appreciate the support with the of this business, and right now things are very well, running very well, and we're going to bring some more innovation out to you guys in this year, and hopefully in the coming years after. So thanks again for all the support, and we appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.